Destiny of a Savior by Famous Fault. Chapter 12, Reaching Out. It was a wonder that a child could sleep that much. Walking up the stairs holding the sleeping baby, Atem counted the hours. The child must have been asleep for at least 14 hours. It was truly impressive. Atem had made good use of Yugi's black cloak, making sure no one in the area would recognize him. Being a refugee was something he was better at than he would ever admit. After all, being hunted by social services or Death Eaters wasn't all that much of a difference. The only thing that could go wrong was that Raphael might not live there anymore. In that case, he could get into trouble with the person that had taken the place. Naturally, weird affairs weren't uncommon in the area, and the person might not think anything of it. On the other hand, this was London. It would be naive to think that the Voldemort didn't have any spies in the area. When he reached the correct door, he took a breath.
"Ready, Abel?"
he asked, more for his own benefit than Yugi's. "Right by your side, partner," Yugi replied, and Atem pushed the button on the doorbell. Atem stood there with an astral version of Yugi at his side, waiting for the door to open. He was just about to turn to leave, convinced no one was home, when the door opened. Meeting his red gaze were the gray eyes of a tall man with blonde hair. It was Raphael. His eyes widened when he recognized the face under the hood. He hastily opened the door further and invited them in.
"Were you followed?"
Raphael asked, who, despite more than a year of no business with the wizarding world, wasn't stupid.
"No, I think we're relatively safe,"
Atem said, not clarifying which "we" he meant.
"Good,"
Raphael said gravely.
"I suppose you are here for a reason. If you wanted to chat, you would have come earlier."
It was somewhat harshly straight on, but it was also true. Atem nodded. The child was still hidden underneath his cloak, and Raphael had not noticed him yet.
"I'm indeed here for a reason. However, did you want us to come by?"
Raphael looked at him, considering the unexpected question.
"Perhaps. I think so. Yes. Though I do understand why you didn't. I too would have been angry had I been in your position." "I'm not angry. Neither is Yugi. We know that it needed to be something very important to you to let it happen, and we respect that you are unwilling to share it with us,"
Atem said.
"Of course, it'll be foolish not to worry. Something that big means something, but I'll assume you have your reasons." "Ha!"
Raphael laughed, a laugh without joy.
"I see. You really would have made a good pharaoh. So why haven't you come and visited if you weren't angry?"
he asked, looking at him with a raised brow.
"We, or more accurately, Yugi, has been busy. Traveling was not something he spared any time for. We went back to Japan, and he opened the Kami game shop together with Ryo Bakura. Both of them nearly spent all their time in the shop,"
Atem explained. A small smile appeared on Raphael's face.
"It went on living. Very wise of him. What about you? What did you do?" "I just tagged along. Happy Yugi found some sort of normal life again." "Then why are you here? Not only here, but back in Britain. Back to the wizarding world,"
Atem asked. In his opinion, everyone was better off simply staying away from worlds they did not belong in. Then again, did those two even belong in any world anymore?
"Dumbledore died. We wanted to pay our last respect. In addition to that, now with Dumbledore gone, there isn't anyone left who can suppress Voldemort. He's already controlling the ministry and probably the school, if the last thing I saw of it was anything to go by. Hogwarts was our home. Not all our memories of it might be sunshine and butterflies, but it welcomed us in the first place. Neither Yugi nor I could stand by and watch these people suffer. So we returned, trying to find out what we could do."
Atem sighed, feeling Joe shift in his arms. The child was waking up.
"I see,"
he said once again. He understood, though. Neither the Pharaoh nor Yugi was a person who could stand by when they could protect. He just hoped that they wouldn't do anything too stupid. A whole lot more was depending on Atem and Yugi than they knew.
"And why in my apartment?"
Raphael asked. Atem sighed deeply, and Raphael could tell he wasn't really willing to tell him.
"The reason you're talking to me and not to Yugi is because when we were looking for Peter, a friend of Rebecca's who is Muggle-born, I saved a child. In Yugi's opinion, I'm the one who was supposed to take care of that child, so it's mostly been me in control lately."
Joe would really wake up any moment. Atem steadied his grip around the child to make sure that when he started moving, it wouldn't fall. Then he moved his arms forward from underneath the cloak so Raphael could see.
"I've been taking care of him ever since, but I suspect that we're wanted men by now, and it is far too dangerous for a child."
Raphael gawked. That was among the last things he'd been expecting. The child looked oddly misplaced in the hands of the ancient king. It stirred as it started to awake. It opened a single blind eye, then closed it again, still not entirely awake.
You're on the run with an infant,
Raphael said, having a harder time to comprehend the situation than he did. Then he gathered himself, his expression growing to the one Atem had often seen when they had still been enemies.
What did you save him from? Death. His mother dropped him to the floor. I caught him using the shadow creatures. She was a drunk, living in the slums of Portsmouth. She just left him there. I couldn't walk away knowing he'd die if he stayed. Instead, I took him with me. Yugi and I are good at staying hidden, but we want to do more, and Joe is a liability.
Atem answered, closely examining Raphael's reaction on his words.
Joe. Who named him?
Raphael asked. It didn't surprise Atem that Raphael had noticed as much.
I did. He didn't have one, so I took the liberty. And now you wonder if I could take care of him.
Raphael stated and closed his eyes. He sat down on the couch, folded his hands, and sighed deeply.
Why didn't you just leave him at an orphanage? Because of the way Rebecca reacted when Sean Daniel showed up, among other things.
Atem stated.
What you did was highly illegal. One can't just abduct a child from their mother. I understand why you didn't, but when they find out, he must have some sort of name. He was born at every hospital.
Atem interrupted the blonde.
He wasn't born in a hospital. He was born in that building filled with drug addicts, runaways, and drunks. No one even knows this child exists. He's blind. I've been told that it's common among infants if the mother drinks during pregnancy.
Raphael nodded.
That's true.
His expression was grim.
I hope you understand. You can't save everyone, neither from a situation like Joe's or from Voldemort. People die. It is something that you have to learn to live with. I know I can't save everyone. When I was still alive when we fought Zork, all the priests died. The only survivor was Set. One by one, they all died as their energy ran out while their monsters were destroyed. I couldn't protect them. They died. I did what I could to protect the villagers too, but not even all of them I could save. Many people died in that short but horrible battle,
Atem said. Then he laughed.
Even I died. It doesn't feel like it, but I did. In the tomb, I couldn't protect them either. I got Yugi out, but that was it. In the ministry, I tried to protect them all, but I failed. Rebecca died. And now...
Atem's voice faltered, an icy hand gripping his chest.
Rio came with me. But when the Death Eaters entered Hogwarts, we were together. It was ordered for us both to be killed, and although McGonagall promised me she'd make sure he'd be alright, I don't know. Rio might be dead as well.
The prospect of losing yet another friend made him worried, sick. How come everyone around him died? He hugged Joe a bit closer, more instinctively than anything else. From inside, he could feel Yugi's worry, bordering to all-over fear. He can't be dead, he heard Yugi sob. They can't have gotten to him. Atem didn't reply. The way they reacted on death was one of the things that showed how different they were. He remembered Battle City when Jinochi had lost to Merrick and Honda had confirmed that Jinochi had no pulse. Atem had not processed the information, simply hadn't held it for possible. Yugi, at the other hand, had fallen to his knees, crying, heartbroken. It tortured them equally, but differently. He would accept the fact that Rio could be dead, but would refuse to believe it when it was confirmed, while Yugi would furiously deny the possibility that Rio could be dead and wouldn't be the least surprised if it turned out Rio indeed was dead.
Can't you confirm with her that she got him safe somehow? The shadow creatures.
Raphael started.
I have.
Atem interrupted him.
They don't return. I don't know what is going on, but somehow they leave for Hogwarts and never come back with any news.
Raphael sighed. That meant little good.
I'm very sorry,
he whispered.
Where are you planning to go to Hogwarts?
Atem shook his head.
No, we're looking for Dean and Tracy. They didn't return to the school after Dumbledore died. They figured it wouldn't be safe for them, and they are on the run. I want to see if they're alright, hear if they know something more, and set up a sort of communication with them, like I did with Peter. Then we'll see what state the world is in.
Atem leaned backwards and folded his hands behind his head.
You're going to fight? Yes. Everyone already knows I exist, so it doesn't really matter anymore if they learn about the shadows. They've already seen a fair bit of it, enough to know I'm not defenseless. They just don't know how exactly much I can do. I just have to wait for the right moment.
And you can't do that while taking care of a child,
Atem said.
It might also drag on several years. You have considered that, haven't you?
I'm hoping it ends as soon as possible. They have already started capturing Muggleborns, might already have started killing them, I don't know. But if this goes on for several years, entire Britain will be involved, not just the wizarding world. The moment this spreads outside the wizarding world, the consequences are unavoidable. If the general population hears about this, it will become one large war with more bloodshed than either side could foresee,
Atem said, having had a lot of time to think about it. Raphael nodded gravely.
Many people might be ignorant about them, but no one will simply give in to them upon learning. Every person in the world will fight for their freedom. You do know that this will end with the extinction of wizards and witches, right?
That's the conclusion I drew.
Atem confirmed.
Or people will literally wipe each other out and neither is left. Wizards don't know how much people like you and me are capable of. They don't even know how the metro works, let alone nuclear weapons, or even simple guns. They might claim that there are none left after the Cold War, but I'm pretty sure that if required, there would be enough nuclear bombs to literally blow up the Earth. More than once.
Atem raised an eyebrow.
For a 5,000-year-old spirit, you know an awful lot about things like that, he noted simply.
Atem sighed.
Yugi is a history teacher. I picked things up here and there. I'm still behind when it comes to some things, but I know enough about history, and warfare, for that matter. People don't hold back in the least. They won't stop until every last witch and wizard in existence is exterminated, and the wizards won't see what's coming. People kill what they fear, it's human nature. They won't feel safe until every last wizard and witch is dead, regardless if they were on Voldemort's side or not. This war must end before that, at all costs.
Atem said, and his jaw tightened while he clenched his fists. The thought of what could happen otherwise was far too horrible.
We'd end up destroying the world.
Raphael sighed and started laughing.
Such a thought. It's hard to imagine that once that was what I wanted.
There fell a silence where both were lost in their own thoughts, and Raphael spoke up again.
I'll take care of Joe. You make sure this ends.
It were simple words. You make sure this ends. The task attached to them was, however, far greater than the words witnessed about, yet he knew he could bear it. His heart had been strong enough to bear the hatred of all the souls the Orichalcos had captured, and he had not backed down when demons had threatened his country. He had literally done whatever it took in both cases, and he had perhaps not lived, but managed it.
With everything that is in my might, I'll do whatever it takes. Perhaps we can spare this ignorant world.
Joe had been listening in on the conversation, and although he did not understand any of it, Atem noticed he wasn't as cheerful as he used to be. It was only then that the spirit noticed the tension in the room, the kind of tension that came with horrible anticipation.
How hard do you think it will be to prevent this war from spreading?
Raphael asked, stood up and walked to the window to look outside.
I think we have some time. Let's start with taking full control of everything that happens in the wizarding world. Not before they are sure that everything is in their hands and all opposition has been crushed, that they will take it further.
Atem said, and he too stood up. He gently removed Joe's hand from his bangs, a gesture he had become so accomplished with that he almost did it without thinking. Raphael, who saw it, smiled. Then he reached out his arms toward the ancient king, who gently put the child in Raphael's arms. In the blonde's large muscular arms, the child looked even smaller than he actually was.
Someone once said to me,
Atem started, looking at Joe,
that the people of today have to cross rivers of blood and bear their sins, so the next generation can live in happiness and peace. That's one of the thoughts which helped all of us through the battle against Zork. But when I think about it now, we will cross these rivers of blood and carry the horrors we have seen for the next generation. But the next generation will do the same for the generation that comes after them, and they will do it yet again for those who come after them. Like that, there isn't any generation that will live in happiness and peace. I don't recall who said it, but they were wrong. It doesn't work that way.
Raphael tried to smile, but it looked more like grimace.
If I recall correctly, after you sacrificed yourself, there was an age of peace. Isn't that what the statement meant?
All these people that died, it should have been worth so much more than just 100 years. It should have lasted a millennium at least.
Atem said, his hands still clenched in tight fists. Raphael put a hand on the shoulder of the ancient being next to him. The child he carried in one arm only. Joe laid there trying to reach out to Raphael's bangs, but the man was too tall and the infant couldn't reach them.
Then we'll just have to make sure that when this war ends, a millennium of generations will be able to live happy and at peace.
Atem smiled. It did not reach his eyes.
I might just be around long enough to see if that happens.
Raphael didn't reply. He knew about the uncertainty concerning Yugi's death. Regardless if it would be tomorrow or over 70 years, Yugi's death was something that really had the spirit worried, even though at the moment his mind was occupied with other things. Then a sound from the hallway made all three of them look up, for as much as any of them could see. Atem was the one who warily and prepared for anything walked over there. Then he felt a familiar sensation and relaxed. Blade Rabbit skipped into the living room. His appearance could only mean one thing.
He's found Tracy indeed, which means I'll make my leave.
Atem said.
Thank you.
Raphael shook his head.
Instead of thanking me, promise me the two of you will come here again when it is over.
Atem smiled. That was already the third person who had told him so, and to him even. The people who were said to despise and fear him had shown to be more open-minded than he could have ever hoped.
We will, both for you and for Joe.
No worries. I still have some tricks on my sleeve.
Raphael said and looked at Joe with a comical expression, a mixture of disbelief, dejection, and acceptance.
This was a remarkable turn of events.
It's something else to fight for,
Atem said.
He's the next generation, the one we cross rivers of blood for.
Raphael smiled.
If you need help with anything else, send me a message.
Thank you, again.
Atem said, and followed Blade Rabbit out the door. He was surprised to see that Joe reached out for him when he closed the door behind him. The room of requirement looked like a small apartment. It provided everything except food and company. Rio spent most of his days pacing from one side of the room to the other and back again. It was something he associated with old philosophers, not young grown-ups like himself. Sometimes he felt the need to scream at his frustration, but he never did. Although he knew the room was a safe harbor, he did not wish to test his luck. He had been there for almost a full month now, and he was slowly growing insane. The solitude and hopelessness made him sad. He wished he could do something, anything. It didn't matter how dangerous or insane. The only points of his day he looked forward to were Dobby's visits. The elf could tell him everything about Yugi's time at Hogwarts, and he told colorful stories of everything Yugi had done as well as he could. Rio enjoyed hearing about his friend. While some stories made him undoubtedly worried, he also had some good laughs at some of them. Dobby also told him about other things that had happened at Hogwarts. Most of it Yugi had already told him, but there was something truly fascinating about hearing the elf-tale tales. One of the things that made Rio really happy was when he learned that the room provided books. He spent more time reading than he ever had before. The choice of books was wonderful. He had spent a fair amount of time marveling at the comics called The Adventures of Martin Miggs, the Mad Muggle. He did also read the Wizarding World's version of fairy tale when he read the tales of Beetle the Bard. He did, however, not only read fictional stories. He had simply stood and stared at the titles he passed when the room had provided him with a random selection of all sorts of books when he had wanted to know more about the Wizarding World. Dragon Species of Great Britain and Ireland, Blood Brothers, My Life Amongst the Vampires, Preferred Preface for Perfect Prefects, Quidditch Through the Ages, A History of Magic. Rio had not even tried to read all of them. Most of the titles alone surpassed his knowledge. In the end, the reading became like one great puzzle. Some books he discarded quickly as they were of absolutely no use to him. For example, Practical Household Magic and Where There's a Wand, There's a Way. There wasn't much in any of them of which he could learn too much. Hogwarts A History was, however, a book that he learned page by page, since he was determined to know as much about the school as possible when he was getting out. There was a lot of law books concerning the Wizarding World, which Rio studied carefully. Reading could, however, only do so much. Reading all the time was a bit too extreme for him, especially since it had been several years since he had used the Western language for anything else but talking. At times, Rebecca visited. Rio had never actually met Rebecca while she was alive, not counting the funerals, as he only remembered so much of them, and Rebecca wasn't part of that. She told him about what was going on at the school during the time Rio was in the room of requirement, and he did not like what he heard. According to Rebecca, Hogwarts wasn't really Hogwarts anymore.
Eventually, he lost his patience. He had worked through most of the books, Dobby had told all his stories, and he'd started pacing again. Rebecca, I can't just sit here and do nothing. The students are being tortured and I can't do anything. Let me do something.
Rio, you wouldn't be able to protect yourself, Rebecca protested. They will kill you the moment they see you.
Then I have to make sure I'm not seen. Yugi told me you were able to make yourself invisible by using a potion. Can't you do something like that for me? I feel worthless, Rebecca. It's horrible.
She understood how he felt, but unlike the students, Rio was at far greater risk. Him, they'd kill without a second thought. And what would you do? She asked. Rio opened his mouth to reply, but couldn't even think about anything.
I don't know,
he admitted reluctantly. Then don't ask me to do something as hard. I'm a ghost, Rio. I can't perform magic any longer. She bit at him, then she flew off. Rio sighed. She was right, but it didn't make things any easier on him. He could hardly spend the rest of his life in here, could he? Apparently, the Ministry of Magic had a dungeon. Perhaps that wasn't all too weird, but Cole had never actually thought about it. He had been locked away together with Aunt, Heather, and 2 others who were a fair bit older, 5th and 6th years. The cell was a bit small for the 5 of them, but they did the best they could. From King's Cross, they had been taken by portkey to the lower layers of the Ministry of Magic. Then they were shoved in cells by groups of 5. There was no particular order when they did so. They grabbed 5 and pushed them in. The heavy wooden door was slammed shut behind them. When Heather, who was tallest, had been able to see over the heads of the others what they did, so she, Cole, and Aunt held on tight to each other, resulting in them being shoved into the same cell. It was a cell of the sort that one usually saw in movies set in medieval times. Stone, no windows, and a wooden door reinforced with iron. There were even shackles attached to the wall, but they weren't in use. The only light came in through the little window in the door, hardly large enough to look around. The only sense of time was when they extinguished the lights at nighttime. Heather remembered the amount of days for them. They got food once a day, hardly enough to sustain all of them, and the oldest of the 2, a 6th-year Hufflepuff girl named Leanne, sometimes simply did not eat because she said the 3 of them needed it more. The Gryffindor 5th year, called Frederick, also ate less for their sakes. Cole felt guilty, but he was so hungry that he did not complain. It wasn't that the food itself was anything to cheer for. It was plain disgusting. For what felt like a very long time, they tried to keep the mood up. Aunt and Cole did their best to duel in the little light they had, and although it was tiresome to double-check the cards at the little window in the door, it was possible. Despite Cole's presumption that Heather would not be interested in the game, she eagerly listened while Cole and Aunt explained the game. It wasn't only Heather who was interested. Leanne and Frederick learned too. Although their interest was genuine, Cole doubted they would have cared had it not been to kill time. Killing time was truly a task that required skill, especially considering their condition. With someone like Heather, however, it became slightly easier. Heather knew 1,000 short stories, like The Hitchhiker by Roald Dahl. She could recite them word by word and was even able to make it sound like a story, and not as if she was reciting words from memory. When Heather wasn't telling stories, they were playing Pictionary on each other's backs. It was something Cole really was poor at. He never guessed right what any of them drew on his back. They played tic-tac-toe from memory, always ending in draws. Sometimes Frederick and Aunt worked out, but when they started to suffer from weakness due to malnourishment, they stopped. When Heather ran out of short stories, she settled with reciting entire books. Among others, Pride and Prejudice, Wuthering Heights, Lord of the Flies, Jane Eyre, Dracula, and Oliver Twist. Clearly, Heather had a certain preference for the older books known as classics, while some bored Cole a fair bit simply because he found the language too tiresome to follow. He did enjoy the more adventurous ones. The 3 boys soon lost interest in several of the stories, and then with hushed voice, Heather would only tell Leanne, while the boys did different things. But all the time, while killing it, all 5 of them were dead scared. They all knew Voldemort's attitude towards Muggleborns, and the events on the train showed that his followers had quite some fingers in the game. They had also all read the article summoning Muggleborns to register at the Muggleborn Registration Commission. Clearly, that had not told the entire truth either. They were all fearfully waiting for the day they were summoned. Nobody knew what happened after the hearing, but they all had a very bad feeling about it. Sometimes the topic steered that way. Do you think they have all the Muggleborns who went to Hogwarts? Now, Heather, Frederick, and Leanne said simultaneously. Their tones were sharp and sounded more like they were trying to convince themselves rather than Aunt, who had raised the question. No, Frederick repeated. Dean Thomas, who goes 2 years above me, was not caught. I was among the first out of the train, and he was never thrown out like the rest of us were. I also know of a person who wasn't there, Leanne said, and Heather nodded, agreeing with the older girl. They won't have it easy, though. They'll be hunted down mercilessly. We all saw what happened to those who tried to escape. Potter wasn't on the train, Frederick stated darkly. Wonder what he is up to. Then the door opened with a loud bang as it hit the stone wall. Leanne had just enough time to move away before the door crushed her. In the doorway stood a tall man with such a broad posture that he nearly blocked out all the light.
Potter has simply run off to cover, somewhere in a cave or so,
the man said with a mocking voice and bent down so that his thin black hair fell forward. He looked down on them with an expression of disgust.
Just came in to tell you that the 5 of you are on trial tomorrow, starting with you,
he said with a grin, and looked at Heather, who was sitting terrified in a far corner. Then he took a step back and slammed the door shut. I don't believe that, Aunt said with full conviction. They must be doing something. If not Potter, then someone else, Cole said, recalling Rebecca's speech. There was quite a bit of movement against Umbridge a year before you three started at the school. That will rise again, probably on larger scale, Frederick said, with a tone witnessing that he was, or had been, an insider. Then his expression changed, and from a pocket he conjured a galleon. And the galleon looked ordinary enough, but clearly it wasn't. Frederick lowered his voice so they would not be overheard. 2 years ago, when Umbridge came and we didn't learn to defend ourselves anymore, Hermione Granger, Potter's friend, decided that we should learn anyway. They started the group called the DA, Dumbledore's Army. They started off as only a little group with the people Potter knew he could trust. It grew, though, and along the line I came in, too. Potter taught us a lot. He's actually really good. We held our meetings inside the room of requirement, and to make sure we had a safe way of communicating, Granger put a spell on a galleon for every person who became part of it. At Aunt, Heather, and Cole's blank faces, Frederick explained where the room of requirement was. I thought it was only a myth, Leanne said, baffled. Frederick just shook his head. No, it is for real. Anyway, like everyone knows, these galleons have a serial number that identifies the goblin who made it. We used it, however, to communicate the date of the next meeting. Harry would change the number, and our coins would start to carry that same number, sending a time and date. If we could change the number on this coin, we might be able to pass a message to the others of the DA, telling them about our situation. Frederick, Leanne sighed. Sure, it's a wonderful idea, but we don't have our wands. Heather, Cole, and Aunt exchanged doubtful glances. We might not need a wand, Cole said after a while of uncomfortable silence. Leanne and Frederick looked at him, skeptical. What do you mean? Well, we have not really been honest with the rest of the school, Aunt confessed, and Heather nodded, although she still was a bit shaken after hearing about their approaching doom. Everybody knew that if they were found guilty, they would be sent to Azkaban, and they had all heard the stories. What do you mean? Leanne repeated, her tone changing to caution rather than skepticism. Who's we? Us, all the first years, second years by now, Cole said. We promised him. Oh, Frederick asked, although he had a suspicion. Professor Majishon, Aunt whispered. Leanne and Frederick just stared at them. Then Leanne started to shake her head. No, that's not possible. I had him in history. He taught us the things he was supposed to. Surely he is a bit strange, but... Exactly, Cole said. We all, including Professor Majishon, lied to you. We promised him we wouldn't tell any of the others, neither student nor teacher, and we all stuck with it. But you are going to tell now, aren't you? Frederick asked, with a clear sharpness to his voice. Cole, Heather, and Aunt nodded. I think he taught us all that for cases like these, Heather said. In the beginning, he just taught us about magicians and what role they had in the history of wizard kind. But when he noticed that we really kept shut and actually cared about what he taught, he started to teach us different things. Has any of you noticed that those in our year were exceptionally poor at magic, especially charms and transfiguration? Cole asked the two older students. Frederick shook his head, but Leanne nodded. Yes, I heard McGonagall talk about it with Professor Flitwick. They were worried. It's Professor Majishon's doing, Cole continued. After he, with just a couple of lessons, expelled all sort of prejudice from our minds, he started to teach us the theory of using outer magic, the magic magicians use. We've never actually tried it, but we know the theory, Heather said, who had gotten over her fears at least a little. In theory, it isn't all that hard. But he said that one needs a different way of thinking than a regular wizard or witch. The fact that we are unusually poor at the normal subject is hopefully a sign that we've started thinking differently, Cole said. Using outer magic, we should be able to change the numbers on the coin to a message that those on Hogwarts will receive. Frederick and Leanne gawked. So, Professor Marcheshon wasn't as suspicious as he appeared? He was on our side all along. Anne nodded with a smile. He still is a weird guy, though. Naturally, Heather said, her tone grave. Outer magic is not something we're created for. It might be completely impossible for us just to reach out to it. If it is the best thing we've got, Leanne sighed. I can't believe he would do something like that. He acted as if he couldn't care less about what happened to any of us. So, who of us is going to try? Heather asked, and looked from Cole to Anne and back to Cole again. I think we all should, Anne said. We might not be able to do more than a few letters each. It's after all not something we've done before. I want to know exactly what we are going to send, Cole stated. It's better we decide that beforehand. When the five of them had decided the message, Heather repeated the basics of what Professor Marcheshon had taught them. Ready? She asked. Remember, use all your senses to find it and change it. I'm ready. Ready as I'll ever be, Aunt said, and took Cole's hand in his. Cole looked surprised, but took Heather's in his turn, and Heather took Aunt's. Then the three of them focused completely on the task before them, reached out to the one thing that might save them.